What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Doghouse, a fan's best friend to all things sports. I'm Stevie here with my guy Beachy, and we are super excited to welcome you to the first episode of the Doghouse Sports NFL Offseason podcast series. If you enjoy listening to us talk about football today, we definitely encourage you to check us out on all the social medias, TikTok, Insta, you name it, we got it. But without further ado, Beachy, go ahead and walk us through what we're going to be discussing today.
Hey, thanks, Stevie. Yeah, so Stevie mentioned I'm Beachy, and we're really excited to start this off. So bear with us. This is our first podcast, first time doing this, so there'll definitely be some bumps along the way, but we're just looking forward to getting our content out there and having some fun along the way. So basically what we're going to do today is this will be the AFC segment. So we'll be going through each team in the AFC, division by division, team by team, and just going through their top five needs for the offseason. And this is also just a note, this is pre-free agency. So free agency starts March 13th, and these are the needs before then. So as you well know, like teams will bulk up on their needs in free agency. And so the needs will look very different from when we're publishing this. Today's what, February 25th, and this will change a lot after March 13th. So we're going to run through their top five needs. We're going to go through a couple notable free agents. We're going to also just talk through it a bit, and then we're also going to have an interesting what if for each team. That thought-provoking, might be in the realm of possibility, might not be. Should we dive in with the AFC East?
Yeah, let's kick it off. And I think the first team we'll chat about is the Bills. So, Beach, when you were taking a look, what were some of the key positions you saw the Bills needing?
Yeah, for sure. So the biggest one for me is going to be edge, right? So they have Greg Russo, which he's really showed a lot of promise. I
For
think they
sure.
drafted him like 2 years ago. However, with Von Miller kind of in the back half of his career, he missed a lot of time due to injury. Edge is definitely a big concern. As with all teams, edge is one of the more prominent positions of need. So it's really key that they pair someone with Greg to help out there.
Yeah, I think for me, thinking about edge, something, and I wonder how the Bills leadership feels about this, but the Von Miller situation is interesting, right? Because he did kind of revive his career, got the Super Bowl with the Rams, and then we're here now. And I mean, I don't know about how you're feeling, but it just doesn't seem like Von Miller's what they needed edge. So I would agree, probably their top need at this point, which I know is what we have in the blog, is edge.
Oh yeah, and good call out, Stevie. So everything we're talking through today, we're going to publish on our website, on our blog, so you can see an in-depth analysis on there of what we talk about today. Um, but yeah, no, I think Edge is number two, and then kind of a sneaky number, or I'm sorry, Edge is the number one, but kind of a sneaky number two need. We both agree on is wide receiver,
For sure. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and like, yeah, go ahead.
Gabe Davis being a free agent is interesting. I think when they drafted him, the hope was that he could fill a number two spot pretty solidly, maybe even, grow to a number one. I think everyone can agree he's not at that number one level right now. And
Yeah,
honestly,
I would definitely argue he's more like a number three than
for
a
sure.
number two even. He showed a lot of promise, and like I think I mean I got him. I had him on my fantasy team this last year, really
Yeah.
anticipating him to break out, but he just hasn't seemed to get over that hump. Like very streaky. He'll have some games where he looks to be the best wide receiver on the field, where he has like 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then other weeks where he has zero receptions. Right.
Yeah.
So finding consistency behind Diggs is going to be a top concern for the Bills. And Stevie, there's been some rumblings that Diggs might be unhappy in Buffalo.
100%. I mean, and that's been something we've seen a little bit throughout Stephon Diggs' career. I think that's a really nice lead in, though, to our what if here for the Bills. So speaking of Stephon Diggs' potential unhappiness in Buffalo, what we talked through a little bit here was what if Stephon Diggs is traded for the Bills? And first reaction may be, why would they do that? But if you think about it, likely the draft capital for Stephon Diggs right now is still pretty high. If they were able to make a trade where they're, given a higher first round pick, they could almost reset the salary clock on their star wide receiver if they hit. That's something we talk a lot about with quarterbacks, resetting the salary clock when you draft a good rookie. But I think the same thing could be said about a wide receiver here. Certainly this might not be, a top of the mind need or what if to happen, but something to think about is what if they could find the right suitor for Stephon Diggs?
Yeah, for sure. And so then if that does happen, then of course receiver becomes their biggest need out there.
100%.
But
Cool.
yeah,
As we wrap up here, I think one more need for the Bills we talked a little bit about was their secondary, which has not been a spot that they've had needs really in the previous couple seasons. But what were you seeing there?
Yeah, so Micah Hyde, who's been, a long-term stalwart at safety for them, he's a free agent this year. And I think that's kind of where whenever you lose a guy who's been patrolling, the back half of your secondary for years,
Yeah.
that's a big deal. And so finding a replacement is key. And also, Tre'Davious White, he's been in Buffalo for a while now, and he used to be an elite corner. For the past couple of years, he's kind of struggled with injury. He's still under contract, should be healthy, but as we know, when corners get older and also have an injury history, that can play a lot into their productivity on the field. So just secondary in general, replenishing that with some youth should be also up there at the top for the Bills.
Totally agreed. So just a recap, and then we'll dive down to Miami. Some of the biggest needs that we see for the Bills are edge. We'll have to look at what happens with Gabe Davis, maybe Stephon Diggs for wide receiver at number 2, and then also in the secondary, safety and corner.
Yeah, and then D-line as well.
Good call.
Yeah, with pretty much the only defensive tackle being signed is Ed Oliver, who is very good in his own right, but he needs some running mates for sure.
For sure. All right, take us through what you were looking at for the Dolphins now, Beach. What are some of their biggest needs heading into free agency?
Yeah, so for sure. So number one is going to be addressing that offensive line, specifically the interior, as they have, I believe, is all three of their interior guys. Yeah, all three of their interior guys are free agents. Those being
That's
Isaiah
crazy.
Wynn, Connor Williams, and Robert Hunt are all free agents. And then that doesn't even take into account Teron Armstead, their left tackle, who's great,
Yeah.
but he's well over 30 now, and he's had injury history, and there's been some rumblings that he might retire. So if that does come to fruition, right there, you have 4 out of your 5 starting offensive linemen that from 2023 that won't be there for 24. And with Tua, who has his own injury history, right? You need to protect him. So dressing the offensive line, and I'm talking investing both spending in free agency and also multiple high draft picks on the offensive line. That's how much of the biggest need compared to the rest of their needs I consider it.
They're fortunate that they're heading into a draft that is very tackle heavy. There's a ton of prospects, especially in the first couple rounds, that really can be day one starters. But yeah, interior O-line, when we were diving into this, was definitely a concern. And to your point, you can't have Tua getting hit in the backfield a bunch. It's just, we've seen it the last couple of years. Injuries have been tough on the Dolphins, but if Tua's out, they don't really have much of a shot, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. Tua's come a long way from a couple years ago, and to continue him on the right trajectory, giving him protection is number one.
What about then on the defensive side of the ball? We definitely know O-line's a big need. I didn't see any other huge areas on offense besides maybe tight end.
On offense, there's a tight end because they don't really have an elite guy there, right? So adding someone there is beneficial, but not. I think we had that as number 5. Yeah, number 5 need. So looking at defense, first thing that jumps out to me is both Raekwon Davis and then the big name and Christian Wilkins being free agents. Wilkins is an absolute force on that line, and he
So,
should be at the top of their to-dos to re-sign. But if for whatever reason they can't work it out, D line is a huge need, and then also in the secondary as well. They recent news we just heard Xavier Howard is going to be released as part of a cap
right.
casualty.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they still have Jalen Ramsey, right? And they drafted in the second round last year Cam Smith. Hopefully he develops. So they have pieces in the secondary, which is why we don't have it listed as like one of their top
Right.
needs. But they definitely need some more pieces there.
Yeah, you do not want holes in your secondary. I mean, anywhere in the NFL, but especially in the AFC when you got to play the Bills twice a year. If Aaron Rodgers gets going, you got to play the Jets twice a year. I mean, we'll talk about that later, but you do not
Yeah.
want holes in that secondary.
Oh, for sure. And then like kind of like a need that might not jump right off the board at you when looking at their depth chart, but it is edge. You know,
Yeah.
because they have not one, but both of their starting edge in Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb coming off a major injury.
Yeah.
Yes, so who knows if I mean only time will tell if those guys are ready to start the season. So adding depth at edge as well is should be top priority.
I think it's something we'll talk about really throughout this episode, but you can't ever have too much depth at edge. So a lot of teams could use some bolstering there, but a good call on the Dolphins for sure. So for our what if here, we would take a look at some of the Dolphins free agency history. Particularly, I think this is a common thing we see within divisions, but it happens a lot of times in the AFC East. The Dolphins, the Patriots, the Jets, the Bills do a little player swapping. So our what if for this was if the Dolphins continue this trend of free agent swapping, the Patriots really do have two free agents that would fit the Dolphins' needs pretty nicely. One being Mike Onwenu, which would be an excellent acquisition for them,
Yeah,
probably
because
an
he can
all-pro
play
guard.
multiple spots. He can play
Yeah,
multiple spots across that O line.
yeah, definitely a startable tackle and potentially an all-pro guard. And then also Hunter Henry, who we'll see what happens there. I think he has established himself as really the Patriots' most reliable target through the air in the last couple seasons. But if he were to walk away, another thing that the Dolphins could consider. We talked a little bit about tight end. But anything to
Or
add before we?
yeah, or you even know what? You know who I think is also a free agent for the Pats?
Who's that?
Little homecoming Mike Gesicki. Could
That would be interesting. That would be interesting.
could he go a
Yeah.
little homecoming to the Dolphins on? I mean, because when he was a free agent, what was that? Two off seasons ago, or was that just last off
We
season?
just acquired him this
Yeah,
last
so
season.
last off season, I imagine he carried probably a pricier tag than he would this off season because he really didn't do too much on the Patriots.
Really nothing.
Um,
Yeah.
but like making a homecoming, reuniting him with Mike McDaniel in that
That
offense.
could be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool. Well, some things to think about there. We talked a little bit about the Patriots. So, at the risk of putting a target on my back, we'll go ahead and jump down to my team here. It is definitely new days in New England, and hopefully that is going to be a sign for some better football ahead. But when you were taking a look at the needs here, Beach, what did you see? I think we all know quarterback's number one, but go ahead, touch on it for me.
yeah. No, I was just about to say I think quarterback is the number one because I think the Mac Jones experiment might have ran its course. It really is a shame because as a rookie, he showed a lot of promise, right?
Yeah,
And instead of taking the anticipated step forward, he just kind of took some steps backwards. And it is a shame because I honestly think Mac Jones' best football is ahead of him, but on a different team.
I think you might
Um,
be right.
I I think there are some tools in his toolbox that have yet to be found. But unfortunately, with the Patriots, there was a defensive minded head coach in Bill Belichick, and they
Yeah,
just went to another one in Gerard Mayo. So I don't think his development is probably come to a bit of a stall on the Pats.
agreed.
Um, but man, as a Pats fan, want that be infuriating if he went and became a good starter somewhere else.
That would hurt. That would hurt. And it's one of those things, not to derail us too much here, but what a different world we'd be looking at if the 49ers took Mac Jones. At least I think so. I'm just looking at the Brock Purdy experience. Certainly there's talent there for sure. But who knows if Mac Jones would have been the 49ers draft pick rather than Trey Lance, could have been a whole different world. Another thing, though, to keep us on the topic of the Patriots, that is certainly a need. And we really balance these two between 2 and 3. But on the offensive side of the ball, tackle and receiver, especially if we're losing on Wenu, we're likely going to lose Trent Brown. Another huge need there.
Yeah, and like whoever lines up under center for them at quarterback will probably be a young guy, right?
Right.
You need protection for young quarterbacks because if they don't have time to process their reads, you're setting up for failure. And then not to mention, kind of as you mentioned with wide receiver, they don't have a lot of talent there either, right?
No.
I think they're headlined right now by Devontae Parker and Juju Smith-Schuster.
Pop Douglas probably deserves a little mention there, but
as a rookie, he definitely. I mean, he was probably. Would you say that he might have been your biggest bright spot at receiver last year?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's much of a competition. I was feeling a little optimistic about Tyquan Thornton. Similarly to the Mac Jones experiment, I think we could probably start to put that one to rest. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what Demario Douglas does here next couple seasons.
Yeah, but regardless of his improvement and evolution, that they need some more talent at wide receiver for whoever the quarterback is.
They do,
and it feels like that's been a search for a while.
It has. We haven't had the ability to find somebody. We just.
This leans into our what if, Stevie.
Oh yeah, you're right.
At number 3 for him.
I know what you're gonna say, but all I'm saying is I think quarterback's the right move. But who could they take?
They could take out of Ohio State, the Ohio State University, Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, I struggle with
and wouldn't that kind of feel like a Patriots move, Stevie?
It would, because it's the more, and I don't like to use the word guarantee ever with rookies in the NFL, but it's the more guaranteed choice. At quarterback, we're likely at a decision point between Jaden Daniels and Drake May, and there's concerns about both of those guys. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is the safer pick. I just wonder if it's the long-term right pick for the Patriots.
Yeah, for sure. But then, I mean, now like on defense, we can probably keep it fairly short because I think you guys are looking pretty solid on defense. You want to dive into that a bit?
Yeah, sure. I think you're right. When you look at the roster, there's not many players that really jump out at you. But I think whereas the offense has failed to keep the Patriot way alive in the sense of taking, maybe not as well-known guys and excelling, the defense has had success continuing to do that throughout Belichick's tenure. And now moving into Mayo's reign kind of as the head coach, I don't expect too much of a difference there. We don't have a ton of needs. I think the one thing that I saw that as a Patriots fan, I'm hoping they're able to figure out is Kyle Duggar. Is a really
he's pretty much like the only big name free agent on that side of the ball.
He is. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have Judon for another year. I know he's aging. Like we said, edge is always a need. But if we can retain Kyle Duggar, I feel really good. Should feel really good at least with the defense heading into next year.
Yeah. Cool. So that then brings us to the last team in the AFC East.
Jets. Jets. What an interesting 2024-25 season it could be in New York, and that really starts with Aaron Rodgers.
I feel like really could be a tale of two cities, right?
You could,
like
100%.
On one hand, if Aaron Rodgers returns to the Aaron Rodgers that we've come to know, the elite Aaron Rodgers, and doesn't show many signs of attrition, this could easily be a contender, right? Because when you look at the defense, they have one of the best defenses in the NFL. And then on offense, you kind of relying to Rodgers to right that ship. But are they relying too much on Rodgers?
That is the question. And I think the answer to that last year was a resounding yes. They were relying way too much on his talent. And it's hard because what choices do you really have besides relying on Rodgers when, first of all, you're paying what they paid, you traded what they traded, and with a guy like Rodgers, there's got to be some reluctancy to bring in any safety option.
Yeah, for sure. And, in fear of, for lack of a better way of saying, upsetting him.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I think that's something that they will actually prioritize this year because I don't remember the exact quote, but I think their owner basically alluded to that they really didn't have a backup quarterback last year.
it's true.
Uh,
Yeah,
and so I think that they'll prioritize bringing someone in, whether that's in the draft or maybe a veteran backup, because I really don't think they want to roll with Zach Wilson being their number two again.
yeah. I
Uh,
mean, not even considering the kind of awkward feeling there was the whole time he was starting. I think you just want a more consistent option. So offensively, besides the quarterback decision there that we alluded to, the only thing I really saw was tackle. That is a
yeah,
need you need to protect Aaron Rodgers, and they
yeah,
have both Becton and Brown headed to free agency.
yeah, 100%. And I mean, it should be obvious, but with an aging Aaron Rodgers, you need to protect him. So
Yeah,
that's priority number one. But also, like on offense, kind of like a less flashing need though is wide receiver because on at first glance, oh, they have Gary Wilson, right? All
yeah.
right, Stevie, name who they have after Gary Wilson.
Um, Alan Lazard.
I think you
I
just proved my
think,
point.
yeah.
Uh,
Who's that
but
guy that returned the punt? They have he's
oh yeah,
interesting.
Gibson or
Yes, yeah,
yeah. But they need some compliments to Garrett Wilson
they
as
do.
well because while Aaron Rodgers has proved to be a magical player in the past and could probably do enough with that offense with just Garrett Wilson, having another number two more consistent option is always a good thing.
For sure. Defensively, I think they're one of the few teams that, I mean, again, edge support is never a bad thing to add, but one of the teams we didn't necessarily put that as a need. More so interior D line there could be a.
Yeah, they
It's
have some age and also some free agents there. Like Quinn Jefferson is a free agent, Al Woods is a free agent. So adding some more beef up front that's definitely a need. But also when you look at the secondary, they're great at corner, right? Because you have the great tandem of Sauce, Garner, and DJ Reed.
yeah,
But at safety, they're losing not only both their starters, but also depth at safety too. They're losing starters Chuck Clark and Jordan Whitehead, but also Ashton Davis. Um, so replenishing safety, while safety has seemed to be devalued more recently
a
in
little
the
bit
NFL. But it's still, you can't if you can take the top off of a defense, that's a big hole. So
for
they
sure.
need to address safety as well.
Yeah, and so to close the NFC or sorry AFC East out here, not to give Jets fans any nightmares past what they experienced last year, but our what if was in a world where the Aaron Rodgers Achilles recovery is not what it seemed to be. We know he's up there in age, so our what if is what if that injury prevents him from playing at the level he wants to, and he makes the decision to retire, recording less than 5 snaps as a New York Jet quarterback.
That would be crazy. And
That
we
would be
actually we actually didn't mention this in the blog or really haven't talked about it much, but who could be a sneaky signing for the Jets?
who's that?
What about a
Oh,
little Joe Flacco reunion?
yeah, yeah. That'd be
Joe
something,
Flacco was there a couple years ago, and he just
Yeah,
showed that he's still very competent, on the Browns. So, I mean, maybe they don't want to bring in like because we talked about earlier how they want to probably bring in a number two, but maybe they
right.
don't want to bring in a young number two because kind of what we alluded to earlier, if you bring in someone, well, they do want to look at the quarterback for the future. If they bring in someone too high in the draft, that they're in win now mode, so they might not want to invest that high in the draft. And
Yeah,
in a middle round rookie probably is not going to be an immediate contributor, even at backup, right? So
You're
maybe a
right.
veteran guy like Joe Flacco makes more sense for number two.
That would be interesting. Speaking of Mr. Flacco, I think we'll head to the AFC North next. We'll go back
Yeah.
to Flacco's roots there in Baltimore. What a great season they came off of. A little disappointing at the end. I think we can all agree not being able to get over the hump, but the Chiefs were the Chiefs. That said, the excellent roster they had last year, what are their needs heading into free
Yeah.
agency?
You know, I have several good friends that are Ravens fans,
That we do.
and
Yeah.
they all were pretty on the consensus that they felt that last year was kind of their year. And
Yeah.
that's because looking to this upcoming season, they have a lot of big name free agents. Just to rattle off a couple for you. Um, the breakout, Justin Matabuke, um, Jadeveon Clowney, Patrick Queen, and also breakout and Geno Stone, who I think he had like 7 receptions. And then
Yeah.
on that's just defense. Then on offense, you have Kevin Zeitler from the line. You have Odell Beckham, who didn't contribute as much as anticipated, but still very good role player at this point in his career. And then, of course, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards
Both of
from
them.
RB.
Yeah.
So they're losing a lot of guys. Probably won't be able to pay them all because they just paid Lamar Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
So this Ravens team, while I still anticipate them being good, I think they still will retain enough to be another contender. It will be interesting to see what they look like next year.
Yeah, and I think hearing you talk about that, one of the really tough decisions that is likely going to occur in Baltimore is what they do with Patrick Queen and what they do with Jadeveon Clowney. I think those are two guys, you hear their names, you get a little excited. Maybe Clowney hasn't lived up to exactly what we expected coming out of
Yeah.
South Carolina, but he's there and he's a presence. And so those are not easy decisions to make, especially when you have success like they just did. But what do you think the right course of action here? If you were the GM of the Ravens, how would you go into this offseason and navigate some of these salary challenges?
Yeah, I think number one is going to be addressing the O-line, right?
Okay.
Because I mentioned they're losing well, shouldn't say they are, but they might lose Zeitler, who's a free agent, but also they might also lose Ronnie Stanley, who's not
Yeah.
a free agent, but he's kind of underperformed recently. He hasn't lived up to his first round draft status.
Yeah.
He's coming off of some injuries, and with the price tag he carries, and we mentioned how many other free agents they might need to re-sign, they could lose Ronnie Stanley as well. And so that offensive line, especially with the loss of Stanley, would be a big need, right? Because you need to protect the guy that you just gave a lot of money to in Lamar
Big
Jackson.
bank. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think priority number one for the Ravens has to be addressing the offensive line. I think then number two, we do go to the defensive side of the ball because that's where a lot of their free agents are. And we look at that defensive line and that front seven, addressing that's probably priority number two. And
Yeah.
then I think then for number three, though, we actually jump back to the offense and look at running back because I mean running, we'll probably touch this throughout talking about running backs, but running back is another position which I don't think this is any news to anyone, but has been devalued recently.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it's tough then projecting how big of need a running back is. I think for the Ravens, running back is a bigger need than most because they seem to really rely on the run game. I
They
think
do.
I just saw a stat. I don't remember the exact. Um, well, you know what? I might be able to find it quickly here. Um, with let me see, with a crazy amount of games that they win, they're better when they run the ball. Let me find it. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Baltimore
Well,
Ravens. Listen to this. The Baltimore Ravens have a record of 0-31 in the regular season and the playoffs when they have less than 20 rush attempts. And this goes all the way back to '08.
wow. That's crazy. What a stat.
So that's not even with Lamar, right? That's going way
Yeah.
all the way back to Joe Flacco's days. So this is a team that their identity for like the better part of like what a decade and a half, pretty much all the way under Harbaugh, is running the ball. And they are returning Keem Mitchell and Justice Hill, who I think are great, really great complimentary guys, right? I think
Yeah.
Justice Hill has proven over his career that he's a solid solid guy. And Key Mitchell really flashed as a rookie, right? But he's on the smaller side, so durability might be concerned.
Yeah.
So I think adding like a pounder to Mitchell's Lightning would be recommended. Maybe that's re-signing Gus, but
Yeah, we know the Hardballs love their running backs. What was the what if we put together here for the Ravens? It's around.
yeah. So the what if is I think this is your brainchild, Stevie. Um, but we liked what we saw from Likely, didn't we?
We did. We liked it a lot. I mean, that was one of their bright spots in the postseason.
Yeah. Well, yeah, later half of the season into the postseason. But yeah, like
Yeah,
Isaiah Likely at tight end, he stepped in and really the offense didn't seem to really miss a stride without Mark Andrews.
it's true.
And and so we're okay, let's be clear. We're not denying Mark Andrews is immensely talented and probably at this point in his career still better than Isaiah Likely. We're not arguing.
Indeed. At the Doghouse Sports, we love Mark Andrews. However,
Yeah. However, with him carrying such a heavy price tag and not to keep sound like a broken record with all their free agents, would it make sense to trade him? He's still on the right side of 30, probably get decent draft compensation,
sure.
and you could just kind of plug and play Likely at tight end.
Yeah. I think it's a really intriguing prospect. I'm not sure how realistic it is, just because of the loyalty there. He's a legendary tight end. He really is. But something to think about if you want to keep more of your guys on defense, want to keep some of those key pieces, maybe you deal one, free up some space.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So
And
let's move on to Cincinnati, shall we?
who
With
dat nation?
how about them? I think it didn't feel right with the Bengals not really having Joe Burrow to finish the season, but it's a growing concern there, the inability to stay
You know
healthy.
what's interesting though is I think a lot of people would attribute the Bengals missing the postseason to losing Joe Burrow, right? And
Yeah,
we're not saying that that probably wasn't the biggest reason, but they won a lot of games with their backup with the guy out of Washington. Uh, his name's escaping me right now.
me as well.
Um, Jake Browning. Sorry about that.
There it is.
Yeah, but Jake Browning. They won a lot of games with Jake Browning,
They did. They didn't look bad.
and you know what I really and they just missed the playoffs by like a game or two. And didn't they start off the season awfully? Like they lost their
They did.
first what 3 or 4 games, I think.
3, 4. Yeah.
Um, and so like I'm by no means am I belittling Joe Burrow's impact on the team or that the fact that he's a probably a top 5 quarterback in the league. Um, but I think that the Bengals need to just get off to a better start than they did last year.
Yeah.
And I think the Bengals are primed to be contenders. You know, they don't have too many high impact free agents. I mean, they did, but then we just got the news right that they're
Tagged.
bringing back. They franchise tagged T Higgins. So outside of that, like some of their the big names that they might be losing are Tyler Boyd, Jonah
Right.
Williams on the line, and at tight end, they don't have anyone. They're losing every single tight end on the roster are free agents, and then on the defense, really only they're losing is DJ Reader. But like uh to prove like kind of just trying to make a point that like this team should be another year of contention for the Bengals. Would you agree,
Yeah.
Stevie?
I would. And they have proven that if there is a team who is Patrick Mahomes' kryptonite, if there's a team that seems to have some sort of recipe going on to beat the Chiefs, which no one else can seem to do, it's the Bengals and it's Joe Burrow. I think we can agree, though, that their key to contention, regardless of how good they can look without him, I think a lot of that goes to Zach Taylor, who isn't really talked about enough as I really think an excellent head coach. But they need to continue to beef up that offensive line. It's been
Yeah.
an area of need and focus since they drafted Burrow. And Jonah Williams, who is a very solid starter, is headed to free agency.
Yeah, and the issue of addressing the offensive line, as you just mentioned, has seemed to be kind of the pain in their side for the past couple of years, and kind of like last year seemed to be the season that they finally addressed it. And then of course Joe Burrow still gets hurt.
Yeah.
Um, but I think investing a lot of capital into offensive line is probably their biggest need. After that, I'd probably say tight end because, like I mentioned, they don't have anyone there.
Yeah,
Um,
got to do something.
but outside of those two big needs, I mean, this team does look pretty good.
You're right. I mean, the defense is going to remain largely intact there. Um, I guess their biggest need is DJ Reader on the D line to consider re-signing there, but not a ton of pieces missing on defense.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess like so for our what if, right? Um, our what if isn't too exciting for the Bengals, but it it involves a guy with the name of Joe Mixon,
Indeed.
and the Bengals seem to have. I'm all about loyalty to players, right? I think there's actually a lack of loyalty in the NFL, and understandably so. But so whenever I see a loyal franchise, I do usually apply. But they seem. Would you agree, Stevie, that they seem overly loyal to Joe Mixon?
I think so, and I'm not exactly sure where that stems from. He's definitely had a solid career, had some really great
Yeah, we're
seasons,
not. Let's be clear. We're not hating on Joe Mixon. Great player. Um, but
but yeah, it might be time to
he's
move
now
on.
on his he's running back is a position where they seem to age quicker than others, and he's entering his upper 20s. I think he probably carries fairly high um salary cap,
Yeah.
and so maybe we're really being around the bush here. But our what if they finally cut ties with Joe Mixon and elect to move forward with a guy that kind of came on in this
Yeah.
end of last year, a guy they took in as a rookie last year, Chase Brown.
Yeah, I was curious to see what it would look like without P Ryan because while Mixon was clearly their number one guy, they used P Ryan a lot, especially in the passing game, and Chase Brown looked good. So definitely
Yeah,
an interesting
and
interesting
he's a really
element.
dynamic athlete too. So
Yeah. So let's head over to Cleveland with the Browns, who I think, you know, a season of up and downs for them, a lot of injury, especially to key pieces. But
yeah,
when we started to take a look at their roster, it's an interesting scenario because there's not a ton of needs that jump out to you, but there's needs that exist. What did you see
yeah,
when you're looking at the Browns?
yeah. So the Browns are a bit of an interesting case, as you alluded to, because they're not losing that many big names, and they're returning a lot of their key assets. So on paper, they should be in good shape. They had a solid year, and most of that year they were missing a lot of the people they'll be getting back.
Yep.
But a lot of these pieces are coming off of injury, and so we don't know the versions of those players we'll get. That includes both starting offensive tackles in Wills and Conklin. That includes Nick Chubb, and
Mm-hmm.
also Deshaun Watson, who right before this calls, we were just talking about how that trade wasn't the best.
It
And
depending on what this next season looks like, that trade could go down as one of the worst that I've seen in the NFL.
yeah,
I mean, it's paid dividends in Houston, and we're
yeah,
looking at
and
Deshaun
we'll
Watson, and
we'll get to the Texans later, but
yeah,
yeah,
he hasn't been the guy. He hasn't been the guy that
no,
they traded for. He hasn't been the guy that they signed to a massive contract to change the dynamic of that franchise. So we'll have to see how that turns out. Um,
yeah,
on defense, I think not to continue to bring up this position, but when you're building a championship team, it's important to have somebody opposite Myles Garrett because Zadarius Smith is one of their notable free agents we discussed.
yeah. So I think that's what we listed as their number one need actually is edge, and that might be like some people might scratch their heads like we have Myles Garrett, the reigning defensive player of the year,
Yeah.
but if you only have Myles Garrett, yes, he'll still do damage, but you can as an offensive coach, as an offensive line coach, you can scheme to double team, to basically try to neutralize him as much as possible. And if you don't have anyone on the outside of him, that can really debilitate the Browns defense.
True
Um,
that.
so I think that's their number one need.
Yeah, and to quickly then touch on their what if scenario that we were discussing is around this quarterback position with Deshaun Watson. What's going to happen? Joe Flacco became a hometown hero, really, at the end of the last season. And so, what if they choose? He'll be heading to free agency. What if they choose to retain Joe Flacco for one more year? That would mean the Jets, like we mentioned earlier, wouldn't get him. We see then Deshaun Watson start the season slow again, not looking good, making kind of haywire decisions out of the pocket, and they choose to ride with Joe Flacco for one last season. Can you imagine the turmoil that might exist there? But honestly, I don't even know that this is our craziest what if on the
No,
dub.
no, and I think we alluded to it already, but I think the decision around Deshaun Watson will be huge for this Browns team moving forward because
Yeah.
when you're paying a guy that much and invested in a guy that much, he has a long leash, right? Probably longer than most, and maybe even longer than he should.
Yeah, I would agree.
Um, so it will be interesting because it's like if you do bench him, well, then you suddenly have the highest paid backup in the history of sports, probably,
Yeah.
right? And like I'm not a contract wizard. I don't know all about that, but I don't think it would be that easy to just cut ties with him
No,
without having
it
a lot of
wouldn't.
dead money.
They would feel it. They're gonna, regardless of what they decide to do with Deshaun Watson, that's something they're gonna be feeling through that contract. Speaking of teams though with uncertainties at quarterback,
Yeah,
let's close out the North here. Tell me what's going on in Pittsburgh.
yeah. Pittsburgh's is an interesting case when you look at them, right? Because they're another team on paper where they're not losing a lot of talent as far as free agency goes, right? When I was looking through this and when we were trying to come up with their um big notable free agents, um, we could only come up with really three, and two of them are backups, and one of them is like a role player, and that is Mason Rudolph, Levi Wallace, and then Shannon Sullivan.
Yeah.
And so like you're like on paper, you're like, oh, that's great. You're not really losing anyone, and this was a playoff team, right? I'm not so sure. I don't think that means they don't have needs. And
Yeah.
kind of like what you just said, Stevie, quarterback, right?
Yeah.
And
What do you do there?
I've gone back and forth what I both on what I think they should do and what they will do. The Steelers are a very we talked about loyalty earlier in this segment. Is there anyone more loyal than the Steelers?
Not that I know of. No.
I mean, and so when you kind of take that in mind, is there a chance they roll out Pickett again?
Absolutely. There
I
is. I
I
mean,
I I think so too. I think there is a chance that Pickett is the starter. Now, I think at the very least they bring in competition. There could be the connection with Arthur Smith coming in as an OC. Do they bring in a vet like Ryan Tannehill to at least apply a little pressure?
interesting. Yeah.
Um, However, I think more likely is they try to maybe get a splashier name and like maybe should we kick off right now with our what if?
Let's do
Um,
it. What if Justin Fields finds his way to Pittsburgh?
yeah,
I mean,
right. Like
the,
because
the cards are there.
yeah, and like that's the other thing is like we won't get to in this episode, but we will cover it when we get to the Bears eventually. Um, but it looks like they're probably gonna draft Caleb Williams number one. That means they'll uh presumably trade Fields, but it's kind of hard to locate who the ideal candidate to trade for Fields is.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
some teams that we've heard are the Falcons, right?
mm,
We've heard the Steelers. I've heard the Patriots thrown around a couple times. Quarterback needy teams, but if you're the Bears, not that this is ever or should ever be a factor in what you decide to do with your quarterback, but don't you think you want to get him out of the NFC? God forbid he goes somewhere and lights it up.
yeah, no, I think so. And so like the Steelers might might present themselves as a likely candidate for Fields. We'll see how likely that is. But yeah, I don't know. But kind of to conclude our talk on the Pittsburgh quarterback situation, Stevie, I kind of have, and it almost feels like a sinking feeling. I think the most likely scenario is Pickett as your week one starter.
And what a journey it's been, because I remember very vividly us talking about Pickett going into this last season and saying there was a ton of optimism. I mean, we
Yeah.
didn't know how good it was going to be, but we didn't think it was going to be like this. And
And I think unfortunately, with a lot of young guys, we see their development really rest on their offensive coordinator. And Matt Canada did not prove to be that guy. I am very skeptical that Arthur Smith is that guy because we know Arthur Smith likes to run the ball.
yeah, that he
So
does. Well, at least they got some backs. They got Harris coming back. Warren looked real good last year, so that's a
yeah,
bright spot. To wrap up the Steelers here, though, on defense, like we said, not losing a ton of big names. I think they'd benefit from another corner. Patrick Peterson is getting up there in age, but is still looking decent. Um,
yeah.
but if they
No,
don't do it
I
this year,
think I think all in all, y'all. I mean, you're anchored by um, who I think is probably the best defensive player in the league in JJ Watt.
TJ,
Um,
yeah,
oh, I'm
yeah,
sorry, yeah, TJ Watt. But with a guy like that, I mean, he's a game changer. So their defense should be just fine.
agreed. Awesome. So I think we're on to the AFC South now, and we talked about them a little bit above with that Browns trade, the Deshaun Watson circumstances. Let's talk about the Texans, though, who, what a different vibe it is looking at the Steelers, the uncertainty, the stress around quarterback position. The Texans have
Yeah.
to feel incredible.
Uh, dude, the Texans, what they did, and I feel like it almost wasn't talked about enough. Like, I don't, on the top of my head, I don't know their exact record. What was it, 2 years ago? But I think they didn't win more than 3 games.
They're
And
bad.
then they went from that to making the playoffs and winning the division in 1 year. Like, that's almost unheard of, right?
It is. Yeah.
And it and they were able to do that with a couple big moves. One, absolutely hitting the lottery in or I'm sorry, in CJ Stroud, right?
Yeah.
And I'll admit, I was a bit skeptical. Ohio State quarterbacks have
That's
not
what I,
necessarily proven to fare well in the NFL.
yeah.
Man, did he? I mean, he had about as good as a rookie season as you can have at quarterback. And then, of
Yeah.
course, I think D'Amico Ryans was a slam dunk head coaching hire.
Agreed.
And I think this team, their best football is ahead of them, and they're on the path to success. Now, they do have a decent amount of free agents, and they're going to need to have a good offseason to continue in that trajectory. But I think, I really think that when we talk about the Texans in 5 to 10 years, this is kind of my hot take. I think we'll be looking at the duo of Ryans and Stroud as being the next great um, head coach quarterback duo.
I can see that. You know, talk about devaluing one consideration in a draft process through one player. How many teams do you think are gonna give a crap about what their quarterbacks are scoring on the, what is it, like the QB IQ assessment
Oh
or whatever,
yeah,
after we saw Stroud go through? But
yeah,
you're right. You're right. The Texans, a ton of optimism there, but they do have needs, and to toss a couple of those out there, they're going to be losing, or potentially losing, Dalton Schultz at tight end, Devin Singletary, who was a really nice, kind of surprising almost addition there at running back. They're going to be losing Jonathan Grenard at edge, Steven Nelson at cornerback, and Rankins on the D line. So definitely a couple of key contributors there that are headed to free agency.
yeah. I think the most concern is definitely with defense side of the ball because I think when you have a guy like Stroud, your offense will be just fine. But yeah, on defense, they have a lot of free agents that might walk. And so replenishing that defense basically on every level, whether that be defensive line, linebacker, and secondary, that they'll definitely need to address their defense.
For sure. Yeah, and I think it'd be interesting to see. I think Will Anderson clearly winning Defensive Rookie of the Year. Great pick there. It's seemed to be paying off. I think he'll continue to develop. They have Derek Stingley at cornerback, who's also looked great. but adding pieces to those positions to support those kind of keystone players now that are emerging to the top of the depth chart is still important because you're right. Like you got a great quarterback in CJ Stroud. Your offense is likely going to be okay. It's a little bit different on defense. You can have one
Yeah.
great player, but that doesn't necessarily, unless we're talking like a TJ Watt, change the entire dynamic of your team. So continuing to add depth there, get more edge support, get some help on the back end with corner, definitely things to consider.
Yeah. And for their what if though, we actually do go back to the offense side of the ball. And Stevie, what do we think it might be the what if for the Texans?
So we tossed out the possibility maybe that the Bills decide they want to reset that wide receiver clock. Where would Stephon Diggs go? Certainly he'd have several suitors, we imagine. But what if, and Houston has some cap room to play with, what if they were able to get Stephon Diggs in Houston? Because you talked about 5 to 10 years seeing the Texans as one of those elite teams. I think if you put Diggs on that team right now, next season they're an automatic contender. That's
we've seen what an true elite wide receiver one can do for a quarterback. And I'm not saying that I don't like Nico Collins and Tank Dell. I love them. I love both those guys actually a lot.
Yeah.
But you add a guy like Stephon Diggs to an already uber talented CJ Stroud. Oh man, that offense would scare me.
Yeah, I mean, and having Diggs there likely just elevates what Collins and Dell are able to do. So a fun one to think about. I guess we'll head over to Indianapolis now. I think this is a team where we just talked about all the positivity around the Texans. There really should be some too, though, with the Colts. I mean, they could have won similarly the head coaching carousel lottery.
Yeah, I love their head coach. He was so we'll get there later, but I'm a Chargers fan, and he was on the Chargers a couple years ago, and I liked him then, and I like him now, and I think that he wasn't maybe talked about enough what he did with the Colts because when I look at the Colts, their roster, their depth chart to me doesn't scream elite talent, doesn't really scream that good. But like they lived above expectations, and I think that is Shane Steichen. By the way, that's the name of the head coach. Should have mentioned that sooner. But Shane Steichen, I feel like, I think you're right. I think they might have hit the home run with him as the head coach. And the Colts, they seem to be a tricky valuation because, like on paper, as I kind of alluded to, they seem to have upgrades at most positions, but yet they played above expectations last year. Like where's your head kind with the Colts?
Yeah, it is tough because you don't really get excited about too much when you look at that Colts depth chart. I mean, Pittman is who I would get excited about. He's headed to free agency. We'll see what happens there. But I think you're right. They put together a solid season. Steichen's clearly elite. But that doesn't mean you don't need to add things. You got a rookie in Richardson who dealt with injury, who Minshew looked probably better than Richardson did last year. We had a small sample size, but
Minshew's a free agent.
Minshew's also a free agent. And if you're going to have Richardson really grow, like we've talked about, the key things you need, offensive line, you need receivers supporting that, and likely a running game with a quarterback who enjoys moving around the pocket is going to help open some of those things up. And likely in all those places, they could really stand to improve. So I think they should feel good, but they shouldn't feel content with what they have.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I think as much talent they can infuse into this roster, the better. Like just to call out like their top need, I think their top need is corner actually on the defensive side of the ball. I think finding a true lockdown corner is priority number one for them. So, and like kind of like their what if, like, you want to dive into their what if because you were kind of
sure,
when
we kind of teased the need of that running game. Yeah, I mean Jonathan Taylor is clearly an elite running back at a position that's devalued. I think he continues to prove that there can be significant value added by a running back, but they had the turmoil last year. There was a clear rift developed, ownership, coaching staff, Taylor. So what if that rift is just too much to overcome, regardless of the contract logistics that they landed on? And the Colts decide to trade. I mean, we just put an example team in here, your Chargers. They're all pro running back away. Likely open up some cap space. Who knows what you get in return, even with a devalued spot. I don't think it's crazy.
Yeah. I don't either. And so that brings us to our next team, and that is the Jacksonville Jaguars. All right. So when you look at the Jaguars, you talk about a bit of a disappointing conclusion to their season last year.
Yeah, whereas the Colts and the Texans in this division probably left last season feeling like we're all right. If you're the Jaguars, I mean, not only is there question marks surrounding Trevor Lawrence, not only is there question marks around the coaching staff, there's just like, can the Jaguars ever do it? Can they put together enough consecutive wins and get over the hump? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and it's tough because like when you look at the team, they're not like they don't have that many free agents, but there's some big ones.
Yeah.
Biggest of all being Josh Allen, the elite pass rusher. Also Calvin Ridley, who didn't really live up to expectations necessarily, but also had a good season, and then also a key player on the offensive line in Ezra Cleveland. But in totality, they're going to bring back most of their roster. That makes you feel good until you consider that they should have probably ran the table with this division last year with this roster, and they didn't.
Yeah. No, you're right.
So it's tough, and I think their number one need is going to be edge, especially if they don't re-sign Allen,
100%.
followed by a wide receiver. So I don't know. Like I think they need Trayvon Walker. Their number one overall pick from 2 years ago to
play like
it. Play like it exactly. And if he does, well, then that does mitigate their pass rush need to an extent. But yeah, so I think the Jaguars need to kind of just prove that they can live up to expectations.
I agree with you. I think it'll be interesting to see what they do at wide receiver. Ridley really, we watched the first week of the season and we were like, okay, here we go.
I drank the Kool-Aid. I drank the really Kool-Aid. I drafted him fairly high for my fantasy team. And after week one, man, was I feeling good. And then by the end of the season, I'm like, oh, well, that was just okay.
Yeah, I mean, you were pouring the Kool-Aid the first week, nice glass, and then all of a sudden the lid came off and everything fell out. But
yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if they choose to bring him back there.
And that does go to our what if.
It does, and it's what if they don't? What if they let Ridley walk? Someone else can take on that salary. He's probably going to be looking, even though it wasn't a great season, for some significant money still. Something that I did think was a positive, and not to be biased towards PSU, but Parker Washington, who was not by any means a big name wide receiver prospect, had a couple decent games last year. So maybe they feel like they have support there. Of course, they'll want to bring more in, but maybe they let Ridley walk and see if Lawrence is all right without him.
Yeah, for sure. And then that brings us to the last team in this division.
The Titans, yeah, and we'll have to be careful because we're not trying to take any sides here. We don't want to leave this podcast making Titan fans dislike us, but I don't know that I see too many scenarios in which the Titans are.
And I'm just gonna go and say it. If I had to choose a team that I think might be the worst in the league next year, it might be the Titans. And once again, not trying to make any enemies by saying that. And teams have proved me wrong a lot. We'll get to them in another episode, but the Rams proved me wrong last year. I think the Rams would be good, and they put together a great season. So, hey, anything's possible. Titans could prove us wrong. But, man, when you look at their roster this offseason, there's not a lot to get excited about.
It's brutal. It is. And, I mean, like, talking about biggest needs, let me run through a couple names. They're going to be losing Murphy Bunting, Christian Fulton, cornerback, Nico Autry, a D-line, Derrick Henry, a running back. okay, so I say these names, right? And certainly there are contributors on the team. Likely Henry pops out as the biggest one. But like besides those specific needs that they're losing, their roster just needs some help. I mean,
Yeah, throughout. And I think the number one need isn't even anyone they're losing. It's just that they were so bad last year, and that was the offensive line group, right? I think
yeah,
that's because whether they're probably going to trot out Levis or will be their
I
starter,
think so.
right? At least in the
Yeah.
beginning. And I mean, I feel like we're probably beating it over the head, but we said it a lot. What do young quarterbacks need?
O-line, they
They need
need some
protection. Yeah,
targets too, but O-line is where it all starts. And if Levis
yeah,
doesn't have protection and he's taking hits 10, 15, 20 times a game, you're not going to have anybody to develop because he's going to be injured.
yeah. And you kind of just alluded to it, but they also need weapons. They have D Hop, but D Hop just doesn't feel like I feel like there hasn't been a lot of chatter about it, but it would not surprise me if D Hop is not a Titan next year.
No, in fact, I feel like if you're D-Hop, he chose the money, and there's nothing wrong with that. He deserves it. Been an excellent player, but I feel like there's got to be something inside of Hopkins who knows the Titans are a contender and maybe is thinking, where could I go to have a chance of winning?
Yeah. And to our what if, like we kind of mentioned him a little earlier, is Will Levis. And Will Levis, he showed promise, right? I mean, I think his debut as a starter, what he threw like four TDs, right? Then I
Yeah,
think for the rest of the season, he only threw four TDs.
right.
So the bright spots are there, and they brought in a guy in Callahan to be their new head coach, OC from the Bengals, with the hope I think of developing him. But
Yeah,
our what if is what what if with a new coaching staff they don't like Levis and they move on for him and they try to trade up and snag one of the top prospects or bring in a vet.
yeah.
So I mean, whenever you have a new coaching staff, you really never know what they think of the quarterback, the incumbent. So
You're right about that. And, I not necessarily play style, but something about Will Levis reminds me of Baker Mayfield.
mm,
And I don't know if it's, personality, some of the pre-draft things we talked about, but as a guy coming from Cincinnati, who's familiar with the Browns, who saw some of the Baker Mayfield experience, you mentioned the coaching staff, we'll have to see what the decision is there.
yeah, yeah. So then that brings us to our final division for this episode, and that will be none other than the home of my Chargers, the AFC West.
But before we get there, let's ride. Let's talk about them. Broncos country,
Yeah,
baby.
Broncos country.
What needs are you seeing for Denver?
So maybe more so than some other teams we're reviewing. The Broncos needs seem a little bit more projective in nature. Um, and because they don't really have that many big free agents. Like the notable free agents we noted were Lloyd Cushenberry, their starting center, Josie Jewell, one of their starting linebackers, and then Fabian Moreau, a corner.
Right.
Um, but the average NFL fan might not even necessarily recognize those names. So, but their projective needs, I mean, quarterback, who we don't know what's happening with Russell Wilson, right?
No idea.
He was fine. He was fine. But but it seems like less so his play and more so his fit is kind of why we might see him move, Stevie.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to be honest. In general, I am a Russell Wilson guy. There's no denying that
Yeah.
whatever last year was, coaching or a step back in play or whatever it was gross. But I think Russell's still got something. I know that's might be a hot take right now, not what people are expecting. I think he still has an ability to lead a team to the postseason and potentially beyond. I think the fit is a little weird. I'm not sure what the relationship is like with Sean Payton. Clearly not super strong. It would be
Yeah.
hard to imagine that they go back to him after benching him at the end of the season. But you're right. Like projective, what are they going to do at quarterback if they don't start him?
And like the writing seemed to be on the wall that they're going to move on, but then Champagne made some remarks that like that's not a lock. So only time's going to tell with that. But until that gets more clear, we do have quarterback as the number one need. followed by corner, wide receiver, edge, and center. Um, a corner, they have a great one in Patrick Surtain. Finding him a buddy, consistent will be important. Now they might already have that on the roster. Like the Broncos actually do have some younger. Like while the Broncos feel a bit like an older team with like Russell Wilson, and then bringing in like a guy like Sean Payton to be the head coach. But the truth of the matter is, they do have some young talent. And one of those guys that could fill a void at corner could be a guy they have in Riley Moss or Damari Mathis. And
Hmm.
then they when you first look at their roster, you might say, oh, they also need um have a needed edge. And they do, don't get me wrong, they do have a needed edge after trading away Bradley Chubb last in an in-season trade. But then I dived a little deeper and Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bonito, I think both had 8 sacks.
Yeah.
So this Broncos team is really hard was a hard one for us to analyze because I feel like they could be a contender next year depending on what they do this offseason, or they could find themselves in the 5-win category. So it's really hard, and that kind of like and our what if kind of brings into that uncertainty, and that is like if Russell Wilson does make amends with Payton and saddles up and leads them to the playoffs.
Yeah.
This CBA, what's going to ring throughout the Rockies?
It's gonna be let's ride, baby. That is what
Yeah,
if there's a world where Russell Wilson leads the Broncos to the playoffs, not only will I personally be rooting a little bit for success there, I think it'd be fun to see.
yeah. All right. Now we move on to team that is quickly kind of like do they feel like they're almost becoming the villain of the NFL a bit due to their success?
If it wasn't for Taylor Swift, they would be the villains. But there's a whole new dynamic now. But yeah, I mean, let's talk about them. Who
Yeah,
can
the
beat the
the, the
Chiefs?
reigning Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think at this point, with Exhibit A being last season, I think as long as they have Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, they're going to remain contenders.
Yeah.
And it seems like it doesn't really matter what else they have on the roster to an extent, but they're gonna get it done, or at least make a pretty good effort to get it done. And
Yeah.
but they do have needs, right? The glaring ones are Chris Jones is a free agent, and they couldn't get a deal done last offseason. Will they be able to get one done here? Who knows? But he is one of the premier game changers in the league. So losing him would be
Absolutely.
absolutely huge. They're potentially losing a L'Jarius Sneed, a very good corner, and also great run linebackers in Willie Gay and Drew Tranquil, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like their defense, um, wow, has their defense actually seemed to flip the ties and seem to be one of the strong suits last season, where the offense seemed to struggle a bit. But they're losing a lot of big names that need to replenish for that defense to also play at the same level this upcoming season.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. A lot of people were saying this was the year to beat the Chiefs. I think to a certain extent, their free agency needs confirm that. But I do think that it's not talked about enough. I think it did get more publicity, especially in the postseason, how good this Chiefs defense was. And as you just kind of outlined there, that's where a lot of the needs are. So if
Yeah,
they aren't able to improve the offense for whatever reason, and they do lose these defensive pieces, I will never again doubt the Chiefs, but it will be interesting to see how they overcome it.
yeah, and I mean, and then the truth is, like, I think as long as the Mahomes, the offense will be fine. But they do have some needs there too. Number one being receiver, who, I mean, especially during the beginning part of the regular season, they were drop merchants, right?
Oh, yeah.
They have a lot of big drops, and I think Rashid Rice. I think Rashid Rice will be developed to be that guy for
I think
Mahomes,
so.
because he's actually one of the guys that didn't really seem to have issues with drops, but they still need another. I think they could use another guy to complement Rashid Rice, and then of course they're losing their blindside protector and Donovan Smith. Um, Although I think he missed a lot of games due to injury last year, anyhow. So I don't know. This Chiefs team, the bottom line is they're going to be contenders next year. Um, and that kind of leads into their three-peat. They find a way. You want to take it away, Stevie? What do you think their
Yeah,
what
yeah.
if?
The what if is They're going to obviously be aspiring to that three-peat. And I think one thing that is interesting, that if he's willing to maybe take a cut, see what the other side is like, if DeAndre Hopkins is in the building and Mahomes has that premier target, like he did with Tyreek Hill, you have Hopkins and Rice kind of 1A, 1B, that's dangerous. I mean, it's always dangerous, but that is particularly intimidating for teams to take on.
I mean, yeah, because we saw what that offense was like when they had a elite receiver in Tyreek Hill a couple years ago. So if you get another elite receiver on that offense, I mean, as a Chargers fan, I would weep.
Yeah,
but
right.
But you know, but yeah. So now we'll move on to the next team, and that will be the Las Vegas Raiders.
The Raiders.
So Stevie,
Yes.
what are we thinking is top of their priority list for needs?
Yeah, so a couple players that'll jump out to you if you take a look at that depth chart headed into free agency. First of all, Josh Jacobs is going to be a free agent. We talked a little bit about those contract woes last year. Andre James, their center, really solid player, also heading to free agency. They're losing a tackle, they're losing some D-line support, and they're also losing Robertson, another solid corner. So there's definitely some needs across the board. But I think their biggest question mark, like we've talked with a couple other teams in the AFC, is the quarterback. Because they chose to move away from Garoppolo, which was likely the right call. But they moved to O'Connell, who I think they were just trying to see what they had. And it's tough because there's still questions there.
Yeah, and I think that they will add another QB, whether that's in the draft or free agency. But it's tough because picking 13, they're not at a position to draft one of the top ones unless they would trade up.
Right.
But I mean, a guy like McCarthy or Nix or Penix would be probably available at 13.
For sure.
But like I do think they're like, while I think it's likely they had a guy, I think there is actually a scenario where Aiden O'Connell is the starting quarterback week one. I think that
I do too.
I think their new, fresh off being interim, now their full-time head coach, Antonio Pierce really likes Aiden O'Connell. So I think that's a chance. I don't think it's the right decision. I think Aiden O'Connell kind of has the makings of a really solid career backup.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But yeah, and then outside of quarterback though, I think I feel like we've said this so many times, but offensive line for young quarterbacks, and they're losing their entire right side. Well, potentially losing their entire right side to be free agency. So, making that offensive line stout after quarterback is priority number one. And like you mentioned, like Josh Jacobs is a free agent, but we don't believe that just because he's a free agent, that means that that's their number one, or even we have it as their number 5, actually, their need.
Yeah, you're right. Because as we've talked about, first of all, running back is not necessarily a position that a team needs to win a Super Bowl, or at least needs a star player at. They have Zamir White currently on the roster, who performed respectably last year when Jacobs was unavailable. And, it's not too difficult to go into free agency, find yourself a guy. The Texans showed that with Singletary last year, that you can grab someone and they can perform well. So it's not a huge need, and likely, at least the way that I'm looking at it, there's a good chance Jacobs is not on the team next
year. Yeah, for sure. And then, on defense, they have an absolute animal in Max Crosby. I think one of the most feared players in the league.
Oh yeah, what a beast!
Yeah. I mean, if I was a quarterback and he's lining up, I think I would quake in my boots a bit, to be honest. But but I think they need to add. They need to add more talent to the defense outside of him, especially in the secondary. But so the interesting what if comes back to the quarterback play, and we kind of did touch on it earlier. But the interesting what is if they do let Aiden O'Connell start the season in hopes of significant rookie development, but they also add a guy who we think might be a riser, and who is that, Stevie?
Yeah, we'll get into draft talk for sure in the weeks to come, and probably talk about this guy a decent amount, because he's definitely below that top group of quarterbacks, but still in consideration. Spencer Rattler. What if they spend a mid-round pick, which is likely a higher mid-round pick where they could find him, let Aiden O'Connell start the season. Hope you get some development there. And you're just kind of playing the tale of two quarterbacks, right? Maybe O'Connell will develop and take off. Maybe Rattler you'll strike gold with. So that could be an interesting thing to track.
Exactly. And that brings us to our final team in today's episode that we will be analyzing. And it just happens to be my favorite team, none other than the Los Angeles Chargers.
Well, it is a new era in Los Angeles for these Chargers. It's been a long time coming, but they have found their likely head coach of the future here. Jim Harbaugh is going to be leading the charge, if you will. But what do we see for those Bolts, Beach? What are their needs?
Being a Chargers fan, it seems recently has been extra infuriating because it seems like we've had so much off-season, preseason hype when we bring in guys, whether it's like when we, brought in Khalil Mack or, we drafted Justin Herbert. Like we have all these expectations going into the year, and we never seem to meet them. And it seemed like we need an identity reset. And that's why I think bringing in a guy like Jim Harbaugh can provide that, because our last couple head coaches that we've cycled through I think they were all like first-time head coaches.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that you can't find diamonds that are first-time head coaches, because a lot of them are. But I think for the Chargers, we needed an established guy. We need a guy who can come in. He has a proven track record of success, and I think that's what we need. And so, I'm trying so hard not to drink the Kool-Aid, but I'm sipping the Kool-Aid.
I'm making it for you, man. There's more coming.
Yeah, with Jim Harbaugh. So, but as far as our needs, I mean, a lot of it's going to stem. So our salary cap situation really tough. It is. We have one of the worst in the league, and I think a lot of our needs will develop through who we have to let go. A couple guys talked about maybe Khalil Mack, who, I mean, is insane talking about a guy like that because he just came off of 17 sacks, right? Why would you get rid of a guy that just had 17 sacks? Well, he's in his approaching mid-30s, and he carries a large number against the cap, especially when we already have like Joey Bosa. So I think like who we have to let go to do the cap will depend on our needs. But as it sits right now, I think our number one is corner. Right, I think our secondary was too leaky last season.
Agreed.
Addressing that, and then also like D-line. Seems like we've been an awful team against the run for a while now. So getting some big guys up front to clog those lanes, I think that will be top priority. And then we are losing Eckler, and I love Eckler. He's a great running back, but I don't think he's going to get the money that he
nor do I
that he wants to remain in Los Angeles. And of course the tight end we had Everett, Gerald Everett, but I think and that kind of like tight end actually that goes into our what if, Stevie. What
it does. Yeah, and I think this is something you've likely seen on a couple mock drafts here and there. But it's a tough decision because it's a high draft place for this position. We've seen a couple teams do it, and it kind of paid off some arguments there. But what if the Chargers choose to draft Brock Bowers with that 5th overall pick? One hell of a prospect coming out of Georgia. But no guarantee.
And, I haven't done enough draft analysis yet to really come to grips with how I feel about Brock Bowers at number 5. I don't hate it as a fan, but like I feel like it's super risky. I think the more risk averse part of me thinks that maybe a guy like Alt from Notre Dame would be a better pick at 5.
Yeah.
And like I said, we don't want to get too much into draft talk here. We'll get into more of that. Hopefully we'll get more into that as we get closer to the draft. But yeah, like Brock Bowers at 5, I mean, I think could really, if he does live up to expectations, would be a great piece for Justin Herbert to throw the ball to. So
agreed. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that overall, as a Chargers fan, there's definitely reluctancy to dive in, but I have a good feeling about this year. I think Harbaugh's going to bring a really great dynamic and mindset to the team. And I can see a world where we're looking at the Chargers as a 10, 11, 12 win team headed to the playoffs.
Yeah, I I think that's a possibility for sure. But I'm just trying not to get my hopes up too high. But
I'm
and that
cool.
brings us to the end of this episode, right?
That does.
And I think we were shooting for an hour. I think we went a little over an hour, but that's okay. We're still getting our feet under us when it comes to this podcasting thing. But that does conclude episode 1, the AFC. We hope you enjoyed it. We're not claiming to be experts.
By no means, dude.
No, but we love football. We've both played a lot of football. We've been fans for most of our lives. So, and we just thought it'd be fun to talk about it, right? So we hope that you were entertained, if you will.
They were entertained,
and maybe learned a thing or two along the way. But like stick with us with our journey. We're still ironing out what it is we want to do with this channel and everything. But we're excited, and we hope you're excited too to tag along with us.
Yeah. So again, if you enjoyed this, listen to us chat. Please check out TikTok, Instagram. Check out our website. All those good things. Continue to support us. Give some feedback. We're all ears. And we'll see you next episode.